So who was Jesus looking at when he rebuked Peter? This is a great illustration of why you have to be very careful at the exact word choice in translation. Jesus has just made his first death prediction, and Peter rebukes him for the idea of a Messiah as dying. And then we get to Mark 8:33, and it says, "But he," Jesus, "turning and seeing," and that's the word we're going to come back to, "the disciples of him," his disciples, and then it's the same word that Peter uses when he rebukes Jesus. Jesus rebukes Peter, and he says, "Get behind me, Satan, because you are not thinking the things of God, but the things of man," human concerns. What caught my attention was the NIV's translation of, "But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter." So according to the NIV, who's Jesus looking at when he rebukes Peter? Well, I think you have to have him looking at the other 11, but he's actually addressing Peter. And the reason for that is their translation of Edon, which is horao. They use it to say, look at his disciples. It's interesting to go through the different translations. NASB, seeing his disciples, which would be the other option. ESV, seeing. NRSV, looking at. CSB, looking at. Net Bible, looking at. But notice what the NLT does. Jesus turned around and looked at his disciples, then. Now, where did the then come from? Well, there's no Greek word for it, but what they're trying to do is to say he looked at his disciples because he needed to know that they were listening to him. They had heard Peter rebuke him, and now Jesus needs to make sure they hear that Peter was wrong, especially since Peter's generally the spokesperson for all of the disciples. He looked at his disciples to make sure that they were listening, and then he most likely changed his gaze back to Peter and rebuked Peter. "Get away from me, Satan." Now, there's quite a bit of difference there, I think, between seeing and looking at, if you're not going to put the word then in. And so we get back to Edon and go, well, what does Edon mean? Well, Edon is the aorist form of horao, and as you scan through it, it means he caught sight of, he noticed, okay. Keep scrolling. Number 2 is to visit. Well, that doesn't apply. Number 3, to experience. That doesn't apply. To perceive. That doesn't apply. So far, it's just that first one. But notice that when horao is used as an intransitive verb, it can mean to fix one's gaze, to look. And then this is BDAG's way of saying this is what's going to be following the verb when it's intransitive. That they're going to be look at someone or on something, to pay attention to it. Here's the problem. Horao is not intransitive. It's transitive. He's looking at the disciples. He's seeing the disciples. He's noticing that they are there. So this is most likely just the normal use of horao, to see. So you have a basic decision here. Does Edon, horao, mean just to notice, or does it mean to fix your gaze on? And I don't think it can mean fix your gaze on, because here it's used as a transitive verb, not an intransitive verb. It has a direct object. And so I think the translation in the NIV is inaccurate, and my translation as well. And it's, but he, meaning Jesus, turning and seeing his disciples, he turned and he noticed that his disciples were listening. He then rebuked Peter. So it'd be a better translation to have something more like the NASB, seeing his disciples, ESV, seeing or noticing perhaps his disciples. You got to be really careful on the nuances of whatever word you use to translate.